法會主席。
President.
請各位繼續站。
Members will please remain standing while the Chief Executive enters the chamber. Chief Executive. The Chief Executive will now first address the Council. Chief Executive. President, members, I just delivered the policy address. When I mulled over the policy address, I had in mind the undertaking back in the July C's question time in LegCo on 3 major livelihood issues. I also had in mind members' input and the public views in the 3-month consultation period. And then I had discussions with the policy secretaries before finalizing the policy address. There are 3 main features in this year's policy address. The first one is the focused approach. I devoted significant coverage to housing wealth gap and aging demographics. I elaborated the administration's measures in the long term. Second,
a new mindset. In formulating the policy address, I try to think out of the box on subsidized ownership. My home purchase plan is actually a refinement of the home ownership scheme. It is an optimized version of the HOS. On the wealth gap, the investment in education as an answer to intergenerational poverty, the work incentive transport subsidy scheme and textbook subsidy are timely adjustments to existing policy. I've also proposed the $10 billion worth of community care fund. This is intended to cover the areas not covered by Social Security with a new mindset and in a flexible manner. On aging population, a short-term measure is, of course, to increase institutionalized service, but we also have to look at community care and aging at home. We also have to look in the long term at a package of measures to facilitate the elderly to take up residence in the mainland. Some expressed worries that I might be completing these last 2 years of work with a caretaker mentality. This is undue worry. Being attuned to public sentiments, I will do what is considered necessary to do with no hesitation, and I will create no non-existing barriers. Some of the initiatives go beyond my term, like emission reduction target and roadside pollution. I hold fast to the principle of doing what is necessary and doing it with dedication. No administration is perfect. There is always room for improvement. My administration and I will, with modesty, listen to public views and achieve the purpose of sharing prosperity for a caring society. The Chief Executive will now answer questions. Mr. Leung Kwok-hung. Mr. Leung, will you please remove the placard because this is blocking my view. I can't really see you. Mr. Chief Executive, I gave you a clock yesterday. You talked about being nice to the senior citizens. We threw objects at you and you raised the OAA. And this clock is being presented to you today. I am putting a question to you, and this doesn't require any wisdom to answer. I won't be verbose. You don't have to worry about it.
in your policy address, towards the end, para 163, you referred to the Basic Law, and you said that we discussed it. I'm not sure what we mean, and it's not time to enact BL 23 legislation. You said on RTHK this morning regarding the BL, you said in your term you
tried to find opportunity to deal with the issue, but you couldn't find the opportunity. I'm sure that the members of the public would be sympathetic with me, and the central government would be understanding. Now, let me put a question to you that doesn't require any wisdom to answer. Since you realize that the public would be sympathetic to you and the central authorities would be understanding, why don't you tell me or tell us with regard to Mr. Liu Xiaobo's being awarded the Nobel Peace Prize, and also with regard to the severe criticism leveled by the central authorities leveled at Mr. Liu, and they said that this is a blasphemy against the Nobel Peace Prize. His wife, Ms. Liu Xia, has been put under house arrest. It doesn't take any wisdom to answer this question. I'm sure that the public would be sympathetic to you and the central government would be understanding. Please tell us that this is the first Chinese national to be awarded this privilege. How do you view this issue? Will you say something which is really sincere for the people of Hong Kong? Will you say something for your boss, Mr. Wang Guangya? Yes, you're done. Mr. Chief Executive, I have no comments on this. Mr. Leung Kwok-hung? President, I remember the Honorable Ms. Margaret Ng put a question regarding June the 4th, and Mr. Chief Executive said that the majority of the people of Hong Kong feel that the nation has advanced and this issue is no longer important. Why can't you say on behalf of the people of Hong Kong? Why on those days you said that you were on behalf of the majority of the people of Hong Kong, and the matter was behind us? This question doesn't require an IQ. It does require EQ to answer this question. I won't put questions which are too difficult for you. You said the public would be sympathetic to you and the central government would be understanding. Ms. Liu Xia, the wife of Mr. Liu Xiaobo, your question is very clear. Why does he say he has no comment on this? Please be seated. Well, you have to preside over the meeting, President. I'm no journalist myself. I have to hold the Chief Executive accountable. Well, it is the prerogative of the Chief Executive to answer the question as he sees fit. Mr. Leung, well, you can offer no comment at press conference, and this is beyond logic. This defies logic. You put your question, please be seated. Well, how can the Chief Executive offer no comment on this? The Chief Executive is here on behalf of the whole of Hong Kong people. Please answer my question again. He said the public will be sympathetic. The central government would be understanding. I'm sure Ms. Liu Xia would be understanding too. Well, this is not a time for debate. If members have any comments on the policy address, there is going to be a motion of thanks debate. There will be 3 days for members to ventilate their views sufficiently. Mr. Leung Kwok-hung, please be seated. Your time is up. I will ask the Chief Executive, please be seated. This is time for the Chief Executive. Mr. Leung, yes, please. Sit down, please. Well, I never heard of any president in the parliament who would offer no comment on a particular question. He might even say nonsense, but he would not offer any comments. You better not be Chief Executive. I've got nothing to add, said the Chief Executive. Mr. Leung, please return to your seat. Mr. Leung, you have to observe the rules of procedure. Mr. Leung, if you do not stop, I'll ask to leave the chamber. Mr. Leung, you have to leave the chamber right now. Mr. Leung, please get out of the chamber. Mr. Leung, you have to leave the chamber. Mr. Leung, please leave the chamber. Ms. Tanya Chen, President, I'm sure that there would be fellow members who would be putting questions regarding Mr. Liu Xiaobo. If I may put a question to the Chief Executive, under the Basic Law, the appointment and removal of an executive councillor would be in your hands. I'm sure that the Chief Executive will understand that the members of the public would set great store by the integrity and the performance of the executive councillors. My question for the Chief Executive is this. There is an executive member who omitted to declare his interests repeatedly, and Mr. Chief Executive doesn't seem to understand people's expectation or high expectation of the executive councillors. I'm not sure whether the Chief Executive is trying to play down the issue or whether he is trying to retain or to keep the executive councillor he appointed himself. Is this in keeping with public expectation? You condone all these repeated non-declaration of interest. Will this undermine your credibility as a chief executive? The chief executive does have the obligation to be accountable to the public as to what he's going to do in future. Chief executive, I'm sure you're referring to Mr. Lau Wong-Fat, are you? Right. Regarding Mr. Lau Wong-Fat's issue, the SAR government's Executive Council does have stringent declaration of interest procedures, and there is a very high standard of procedures compared with pre-1997. We haven't seen any relaxation of the procedures. If anything, this has been tightened up. Every year, there is a need for declaration of assets. If one has stakes more than 1%, declaration would be required, and any land transaction will have to be declared. Also, when it comes to agenda items, if there are agenda items for which there is perceived conflict of interest, the declaration would be required. All executive councillors are doing that. And we do have stringent procedures for declaration of interest regarding agenda items. We would withhold the papers or documentation regarding that particular item if there is a perceived conflict of interest. Also, after Mr. Lau's incident, when someone has declared a company, if the record is not complete, then there is and requirements of additional declaration. Now, whether there is any case of using public information for personal gains is an important issue. Now, when a company has been declared, all the land transaction will have to be declared, will have to be registered with the land registry. There is no holding back, and this is open public record. Mr. Lau made an apology that when he made the declaration, his staff thought that once the declaration has been made, there is no need for any further declaration of the transaction. I think, like I said, the declaration procedures have to be stringent. There has to be a high expectation of the councillors, that because of the high expectation pinned on councillors. I'm sure Mr. Lau has already declared all the records that have not been declared. Also, we have reviewed the declaration vis-a-vis the agenda items to ascertain the potential conflict of interest. The work has not been completed yet. Also, whether there has been any withholding no transaction can be withheld because this can be traced. There is no question of Mr. Lau trying to hide anything. I'm sure that there may be loopholes in our procedures, and we are trying to plug all the loopholes to make things clear. Once we have the details, we'll give an account to the public. Mr. Lau has already done a lot. He said that he would create a trust company, and also he has made all the declaration that is necessary.
Mr. President, after the disclosure of the first incident, I understand that Mr. Lau attempted to declare again. But then on his second declaration, there were still omissions. I don't know whether that was done carelessly or otherwise. If the chief executive is mindful about this and there were so many omissions, do you still think that this member should still remain an EXCO member? Well, it really depends on whether that member deliberately hid the facts or tried to have self-interest. Mr. Albert Chan, Mr. Albert Chan, Mr. Albert Chan, Mr. Albert Chan, you're occupying the time of other members. Mr. Albert Chan, would you please be seated immediately? Mr. Albert Chan, would you please stop speaking and be seated immediately? Mr. Albert Chan, if you're not seated, I'll ask you to leave the chamber. You're occupying the time of other members. Mr. Albert Chan, Mr. Albert Chan, please leave the chamber immediately. Please leave the chamber immediately. Mr. Albert Chan, you leave immediately. Mr. Albert Chan, you immediately leave the chamber. Mr. Albert Chan, Mr. Albert Chan, please leave the chamber immediately. Mr. Albert Chan, Mr. Alan Leung, Mr. Chief Executive, yesterday when you met the media, I noticed that you said that the business sector should prepare for universal suffrage. They should not consider that they can forever rely on functional constituencies so that they could continue with their influence. Well, your opinion was identical with mine. Unfortunately, in your policy address yesterday, nothing was mentioned about the abolition of the appointed seats of the district councils. Chief Executive, in the remaining time of your term, what will you do to prepare the business sector for universal suffrage, and what incentives will you offer them to encourage them to do so? Is it that, like what you are doing, you appoint the second generation of the tycoons to the statutory bodies and consultative bodies? Mr. Chief Executive, we've actually tried to map out the road to universal suffrage. By 2012, we're going to have the midterm constitutional review or reform. Every citizen should prepare for universal suffrage in 2017 and 2020. As I said in the policy address, in fact, I spoke with sentiments. It's impossible for functional constituencies to continue to exist in 2020. So it's worthwhile for me to remind Hong Kong people, in particular, those councillors who will now rely on functional constituencies, to see how they can meet the requirements of universal suffrage. Mr. President, Mr. Leung, Mr. Chief Executive, as yesterday you made those remarks, what discussions have you had with the business sector so that they can meet the upcoming universal suffrage. As I said, you appointed the second generation of the tycoons to statutory bodies and consultative bodies. So what else has the CE done to implement his remarks to the media yesterday? Mr. Chief Executive, concerning the design of our universal suffrage project and the details, that will be the work of the next term of the SARG. But then it's my responsibility to remind our people that there are still things to be done. I think there is a wide spectrum of opinion offered to us, including professionals, grassroots, etc. So please don't randomly say that we're only appointing the second generations of tycoons to consultative and statutory bodies. Dr. Ho Chung-tai. Thank you, Mr. President. Chief Executive, in the past 3 decades, we had altogether built 3 landfills, spending over $10 billion and using 250 or 270 hectares of land. Odor and flies had become our problems. Apparently, for so many years in the past, the administration dumped all solid wastes, including household and commercial wastes, at our landfills. During the debate in the past few days, there was this consensus that the administration should have long-term solutions for tackling these solid wastes. The administration must have a plan for this and implement it. Many advanced jurisdictions in America, Europe, and Japan have built high-tech incinerators. Is it not time for the administration to give us a long-term timetable and to consider such incinerators? In fact, starting from 2005, we've been explaining to the public that in order to tackle wastes, we have to tackle the problem at source, and then we should try to recover and recycle wastes. In fact, throughout the world, there are 2 major solutions, landfilling and incineration. In Hong Kong, we have to consider both. For recycling, we perform quite well. The recycling rate is already 50%, quite the same as advanced European and American jurisdictions. So we've fulfilled our responsibilities in that regard. So there are 2 main solutions, incineration and landfilling. For incineration, we've started to consider that. And if we have detailed proposals, we'll consult LegCo members and try to reach consensus. Now, waste disposal is a territory-wide responsibility. It's not just the responsibility of Chong Kwan-o, but the whole of Hong Kong. Every person should discharge his duties first. There are certain areas in which we have to do more, but incineration alone or landfilling alone cannot solve the problem. We still have to resolve the residue. So we have to consider both methods, and we'll try to seek consensus from the LegCo, and time is running out. Yes, Dr. Ho Chung-tai, yes, I'd like to ask a supplementary question. Just now, the CE said that the single model of landfilling will not suffice, and we should proceed positively with recycling and recovering. Now, if members of the public do not support incineration, well, that may not be the case given the views expressed in the past few days. I believe our people will not ask for more than what people of other jurisdictions are asking. We visited Germany and France and watched their incinerators. As I said, you should actively tackle these 3 aspects. For incineration, you should consider it. Don't try to extend our landfills to country parks, and then you should do more recovering and recycling and incineration. As I said, our recycling business is not bad. Yes, we should continue to work hard. I agree with you that Hong Kong people have been rational in public affairs. We'll let our people see all the information. All right, for recycling, we've been trying our best, and there are 2 remaining methods. For landfilling, we have difficulties. Incineration is another method, and we'll have to find a better incineration method. I mentioned European cases as well as small incinerators like those in Japan. In Tokyo alone, they now have 20 incinerators, small incinerators. I believe LegCo members have already mastered some information, so we have to seek consensus on how to tackle this problem. As I said, time is running out. Our landfills will be saturated in 3 years' time, so I think we should try to identify the best solution. Mr. Tam Yu-chung, the DAB suggested that a textbook assistance should be offered to school students. Our proposal was comprehensive, but then in the policy address of the CE, the scheme is rather simple. The proposal is to increase the subsidy from $200,000 to $500,000 and $1,000 respectively, and the subsidy should be released 1 school term earlier. And then the eligibility criterion is a bit too high. Can you lower that threshold to benefit more students? Now, this textbook assistance is to increase by 100%, apparently quite a great increase. But the expenses for extracurricular activities are also high. I did contact some Tin Shui Wai parents who told me that very often the school curriculum includes a lot of activities, and they will have to pay for traveling expenses, activity expenses, and other expenses. Now, these have posed a burden on the parents. So can the CE urge the relevant bureaus to further review this school textbook assistance scheme so as to target the needy students? Mr. Tam should understand that we should adopt a step-by-step approach. At present, we have 780,000 secondary and primary students. 36% of them are already covered by a textbook assistance. That means over 280,000 students are covered by this textbook allowance. Of course, this is an allowance which cannot cover all textbooks and stationeries. Now, we have to handle this step by step. I hope that you can discuss this with our Education Bureau. But then this is already a great improvement.
Mr. Tam, well, it is true that this is an improvement, but the rate of improvement is nowhere near enough. You said that 70% of the households will only get half rate, and a handful of them are getting full rate. And you know how little it is for the half rate. I hope that you would face up to this squarely. Mr. Executive, Chief Executive, my colleagues would be taking a matter up with you. When we consider the concession, we have to take a step at a time. These measures, once implemented, will not. There will be no going back, and we can only improve upon them. And these would become recurrent expenditure. And I hope that you understand that that this represents an increase of more than 100%. Many families will benefit from it, and the response has been quite favorable. But I agree with you that no policy would be perfect. We can certainly consider a further improvement.
Mr. Lee Cheuk-yen, there was expectation for the chief executive to resolve the housing property prices and also wealth gap issue. And the people are still not able to buy their own homes, and the middle class would be enslaved to their property. Also, the working population. And they are working like slaves, so they're working exceedingly long hours. Mr. Chief Executive, you referred to something which we did take encouragement from, and that is the standard working hours. There are 1.2 million people, one-third of the workforce, work up to 50 hours or more per week. Those working long hours would be working more than 60 hours, and the number stands at 680,000. In Hong Kong, the working hours are exceedingly long without any research findings. You keep talking about family life and good parenting and so on. How do you expect them to find time to be with their family members? It may be late. The CTU has been urging for the dual proposal for minimum wage and standard working hours. Will you tell the working population in Hong Kong the timetable for legislating for standard working hours and the roadmap? So you talk about study. Is this paving the way for legislation? Chief Executive. Well, it's just like Mr. Tam's question. If we take one step, you're asking us to take two more steps. I think in this administration, in 2007, we promised the workforce that we were going to implement the minimum wage. At the Labour Advisory Board, we tried to overcome all these difficulties, and the minimum wage will be in place pretty soon. In this policy address, I refer to this issue. I think the Labour Advisory Board can cover this major issue of standard working hours. I mean, this is no simple matter. We have to look at the commitment of the employers and the situation of the employees. When it comes to wages, we have to make sure that we are sufficiently competitive. We have to look at the long-term competitive edge, and we have to move on with times. So it is our expectation of the workforce to be pursuing education for life. In the policy address, we are trying to pursue this ideal. My colleagues will be presenting the minimum wage soon, and this is not the last policy address that I have. Whatever I say I will do it. I'm sure that this will call for consensus in the community. We cannot be detrimental to the interests of any one single party. And this is the last thing we'd like to see. Ms. Matthew Cheung, I will consider how best this should be taken forward. I'm sure that we have to liaise with the Labour Advisory Board. There is no other way other than going down the legislative route. Mr. Lee Cheuk-yen. Well, I'm glad to hear that, the word legislation, but I hope that there would be a clear timetable. I hope that in your term you would be able to come up with a timetable. You asked for some time. I do hope that you would give some time to the workforce. They are working exceedingly long hours. There is no time for them to breathe. And they do need some breathing time. I take encouragement from the word legislation. But I don't really want to see a situation where the whole matter will be filed away and left to the next administration. Will you give us the undertaking that in your tenure you will be able to come up with the legislation for the Legislative Council? Chief Executive, I can say to you that myself and my colleagues will be working hard on that. Mr. Chen Kin-po, President, the government has launched the voluntary healthcare insurance scheme. For this to be successful, it would call for the coordination and cooperation of many parties. I hope that the medical sector would cooperate also. The government will be putting in $50 billion, and 30% discount will be offered for the first-time policyholders. And the healthy and the young people are encouraged to take part with their participation, like those 30-year-olds. When they first take part at a young age, they will be able to get protection when they get old, and they will enjoy protection even if they don't have any income. So the whole scheme would be predicated on the $50 billion. According to the government, these $50 billion will last for 20 to 25 years. If I may put this to the chief executive, if you cover a horizon of 20, 25 years, when someone starts at 30, the scheme would end when they're 60 or something. Will the scheme fall by the wayside at the end of the day? Will it be sustainable? Chief executive, well, you're an expert. I'm no expert in this regard. Regarding the actuaries' studies, regarding age, there can be further discussion. The key thing is that after rounds of consultation, we know that the public wouldn't like any compulsory contributory scheme. And we have to resolve the problem of ever-expanding public sector health care. And we have to make sure that the public would be enjoying proper health care protection. And we are introducing this voluntary insurance scheme, and we do have the sincerity, and we have conducted a lot of studies. This scheme, this amount of money would be able to cater for the next 20, 25 years. If more people are taking part, we can lengthen the period a lot more. If we can cover the first 5 years, let's not talk about the 20, 25 years. If this proves to be a success after 5 years, we have to review the situation to ensure the sustainability. I don't think Mr. Chen would have to be unduly worried. I believe that the chief executive after me will certainly have this in mind. I have confidence. We should have confidence in the people of Hong Kong. We should have confidence in the insurance sector. We should have confidence in offering protection to the health care of the population. We do have a pretty good public sector healthcare system, but if we don't tread carefully, there may be difficulties. Mr. Chen, I'd like to follow up on this. I do have confidence in the government. If this is workable, I'm sure that the public would be supportive, but the people of Hong Kong are pragmatic. If, let's say, the $50 billion, why can't the government make this a seeding fund? The Hong Kong MA offers us a 6% return. If we have a 6% return, we're going to have $3 billion per year, and this will make the scheme sustainable. I'm sure that if this can be realized, that you can inspire greater faith in the public. There will be more participation. Mr. Chief Executive, I'm sure that you will take the details up with Dr. Yok Chow. If we merely use the interest, we may not be able to achieve as much. Of those 30-year-olds, 40-year-olds, they're healthy and fit. Why do they have to join the scheme? But if we think of our own health when we get old, I'm sure this scheme would be attractive. If you don't join the scheme, how are you going to help yourself when you get old? I have faith in the people of Hong Kong. We will try to explain the details of the scheme. A lot of Hong Kong people have already taken out policy. We're offering more choices for them. Mr. Leung Kwok-hung. President, the biggest problem for the people of Hong Kong currently is housing. The chief executive spent about half an hour on this in his policy address. In relation to the home ownership scheme, does the chief executive have any animosity towards this particular scheme? I get a feeling that you resent these 3 letters HOS. Mr. Chief Executive, is it the case that when you ran for office, you promised the tycoons not to revive the HOS, or what? Now, you talked about this optimized version of HOS. There are people who cannot get public housing. They're making anything between $18,000 and $38,000. And there will be people who can join this My Home Purchase Scheme, and they can save up to $600,000 after 5 years or $700,000. I mean, unless you ask these people not to spend a single penny and save all the money. Now, the down payment for your scheme would require 30% or $750,000 instead of 5%. So, is this pie in the sky for the aspiring homeowners? Now, these are making $18,000 to $38,000. The number of them stands at 150 to 200,000, and you're giving them 5 years' time. Are you giving them something to aspire for, something that is so elusive that they may not be able to get it? Are you offering them a glimmer of hope, or are you offering something which is pie in the sky for these people? Chief Executive. Well, if you buy even the HOS flats, you still have to shell out some money. For those who go beyond the eligibility, they still have to shell out quite a lot of money for their own housing. Now, you can work out the sum yourself clearly. Now, for these sandwiched class households, if they can spend 45 to 50% of their income on rental and also on saving, and also with the added protection of rental non-adjustment, I'm sure that would make it easier for them to purchase their own home. The HOS flats are not cheap these days. It can cost anything up to $2 million. We're talking about no-frills scheme. After 5 years, I'm sure that this person will stand a good chance of purchasing his own home. I don't have any resentment against HOS units, but the thing is, any scheme has room for improvement. This My Home Purchase Scheme would be far more favorable than the HOS flats. I talked about this on radio, and there are certainly 7, 8, 9 more merits with this scheme than HOS. I think the most important thing is what is our housing policy. Our housing policy is to safeguard the to ensure that the housing problems can be addressed. We are giving the responsibility to the housing authority to build PRH units. We have to make sure that there will be sufficient land supply for them to achieve this. In the policy address, I've outlined my plan for this to be achieved. I don't really want to ask the housing authority to provide PRH units and to become developer also. The housing authority has to have a single mission to make sure that the eligible people would be housed in 3 years' time. Second, I don't really want to turn the PRH land into private housing or HOS units. So we have to think of alternative means, so that's why I put forward this My Home Purchase Scheme.
Secondly, these so-called 5,000 flats, we have to gauge the response of the market. If the response is good and positive, as we heard today, we'll definitely identify more sites. To that end, when the short term will be able to identify a site in Chengyi for 1,000 flats, given that our objective is to produce 5,000 such flats per year. Now we'll continue to consider this issue. From any angle, this proposed plan is better than any HOS in Hong Kong. There are many people on the waiting list. The most serious problem is down payment. So if we can help with down payment, it will be good. So this my home purchase plan is to help them pay the down payment. Mr. Lee Wing-tat, well, the CE should not think that I do not support the idea. I support this plan under the HA or the Housing Society. Now, the down payment will be $100,000 for a $2 million worth flat. That is 5%. If the flat fetches $3 million, the down payment will be bigger. Now, we have this flat for sale scheme, and 33 to 50% of premium is offered to the developer. So you should not ask the Housing Society for full market premium. Thirdly, if the applicant can choose to purchase a flat in the first year, if property prices rise by 20%, for $3 million, you're talking about a 600,000 increase. So you're actually eating into all the subsidy. So you should reconsider your proposal to allow the purchase in the second or third year. In fact, we had been deliberating on this proposed plan repeatedly and repeatedly. I think you should ask the users. In fact, we consulted the users, the potential users, many times before we came up with this plan. As for your remarks, I think we can discuss them. Mr. Ip Wai-ming. Thank you, President. Chief Executive, the FTU will continue to chase after you on this minimum working hours issue. You said that you would continue to deliberate on the issue, but given your answers just now, apparently you don't have a timetable and roadmap for us. For the standard working hours, there have been a great deal of studies both here in Hong Kong and overseas. In fact, Hong Kong people work the longest hours. You must allow young people to at least date, time to date. Otherwise, how can they fulfill their responsibilities to raise 3 children as you proposed? So let me ask once again, in your term, will you complete the legislative process on that issue? You've already completed the legislative work for minimum wage. Would you please also complete the legislative process for standard working hours? Well, I share your hope, but I really cannot give you any undertaking at this moment. I have to discuss with the bureau directors, the employers and the employees first. I think we should identify the problems first. I understand that the problems are not that simple. The labor sector should be able to see that this administration really wants to do something for the employees. You witnessed our hard work on the issue of minimum wage. So for standard working hours, we would like to seek the best answer for Hong Kong. It's not just a matter of conducting studies. Most importantly, we have to have consensus between the employers and the employees. Well, I want to do more on a lot of issues. In fact, the green light has already been switched on, so we'll work upon that. Don't force me to proceed quicker. I really cannot give you any undertaking. As the undertakings I gave in 2007, I had done my homework. Mr. Wai-ming, Chief Executive, if you're really concerned about this, if you really want to do something, please give us an answer. Yesterday, when the FTU was asked how we assessed your policy address, we said that you had not been able to tackle the deep-rooted problems of Hong Kong, although you did propose something. You tried to respond to all our requests. For example, the old age allowance for those elderly who are away from Hong Kong for a certain period of time. Well, Mr. Ip, would you please try to be brief? I've been very brief already. So you only told us that an elderly person will only have to stay in Hong Kong for 60 days before they can be entitled to the old age allowance. So for this standard working hours, would you please give us a more specific answer? Is it that you saw the strong views from the labor sector and you're under pressure? So you're trying to give us this one paragraph answer of less than 100 words. What about your successor and your next term of government? You're actually planting a time bomb for them. Mr. Ip, I respect your views. I hope that you also respect the electrical. I already said that I would try my very best on all issues. I have nothing to add. Ms. Miriam Lau, Mr. Chief Executive, 1/5 of your policy address is on housing policy. This indicates that the administration has spent a great deal of effort to study this issue and to resolve this issue. I agree that you really want to tackle the most imminent problems of Hong Kong. Well, the core proposal is my home purchase plan to assist the sandwich class to purchase flats. This is very similar to the Liberal Party's proposal. Well, the Liberal Party does not mind your borrowing ideas from us. But then, if you want to copy our proposal, please copy it to the full. Otherwise, the forward-looking approach will be lost. Well, two portions of our proposal were lost. One is the immediate assistance. This purchase plan proposed by you does not carry the mobility element. You're going to offer them a one-off subsidy. And then it's only in 2014 that the first batch of 1,000 flats would be put onto the market. So it would not be really very helpful to the potential beneficiaries. Secondly, you did not specify who the beneficiaries would be. You only mentioned the sandwich class. Those who are eligible for sandwich class housing in the past, that is 23,000 for singletons and 39,000 for households. For the white form applicants, their income is between $16,000 to $27,000. Will they benefit from this plan? And then the immediate benefiting element of our proposal is also lost. Now you can actually lend money to the beneficiaries so that the plan can immediately be implemented. As for this $5,000, there's no continuity. Once a flat is bought, no more subsidy would be offered. There are many people in our society that who need such assistance. So what will happen after the 5,000 quotas are exhausted? Well, Ms. Miriam Lau, we cannot immediately produce the flats. So we have to have time to construct the 1,000 flats. I believe the Housing Society will be able to do this quicker than the Housing Authority. If the HA is to do that, first of all, they have to get the people under their establishment. And basically, the HA develops large-scale housing projects, and Housing Society develops sites of different sizes. So I believe the Housing Society will be in a better position than the HA to do this. Well, 5,000 flats may not be the ultimate amount. If the market needs more, we can produce more. Please do not forget that the cycle of the property market in Hong Kong has experienced ups and downs. Property prices fluctuate. We, of course, want this plan to succeed. Well, if land supply stabilizes, property prices will also be stabilized. In particular, if the quantity of supply is eased, we'll have to ask whether we still need this plan. According to our experience, at a certain time in the past, even HOS flats were not wanted in the market. And then many people told us that even if HOS flats are to be built, well, 3,000 or 4,000 of them, we're talking about 5,000 flats under this plan. And then you mention loans. Well, it's very difficult for us to give back a site to the developer once we've developed this. We may not even be able to pass the district councils. So the most important thing is to provide sufficient housing units to the grassroots. If a certain land site is used for other purposes, district councils may have a great deal of opinion. So the PRH is to guarantee the grassroots will have housing units, and the longest waiting time is 3 years. As for the sandwich class, I hope that this My Home Purchase plan will have merits and be welcome. Ms. Miriam Lau, the CE has not told me what's the definition for sandwich class. What's the income range for them? And then CE, in society at present, there are people who cannot afford private flats. They have to pay very expensive rent. And some of them are waiting to be housed in units under all these different plans, but they have to wait till 2014. Well, for sandwich class, we mean all those who are ineligible for PRH, including white form applicants. As for the other potential buyers, we do have flats of different price ranges. Some flats only cost $2 million each. Well, 60% of our property transactions are for flats fetching prices around $2 million or below $2 million, 60% of them. When property prices are high, if you purchase a flat, you're actually taking on high risks. So I believe potential buyers have to assess their affordability while they're waiting for this My Home Purchase plan to be implemented. Professor Patrick Lau, President, I'd also like to follow up on this housing issue. CE, in your policy address, you say that the housing issue is the major concern of the public at the moment. In your policy address, you propose this My Home Purchase plan to assist people to own flats. And then in paragraph 26, you say that land will be supplied to the housing society to build small and medium flats, no-frills flats. So what prices will you offer to the housing society? Concessionary rates, market rates, I mean in terms of premium? Well, good question. The Bureau Director knows this more. This is it. I'm not so knowledgeable on this.
I master some information, but not all. Now, they're not talking about premium at the very beginning. The premium will be paid by the housing society to the government upon each sale. That is, upon the sale of each flat. I think that arrangement is the most appropriate one.
Maybe I should ask the Bureau Director whether this is true. That is, the premium will not be paid in one go. And then some purchasers may only sell their flat after 5 years, some after 3 years. So the timing of premium payment will differ. The Bureau Director also understands that we don't want the housing society to suffer a deficit. We want the housing society to continue to take up this task. So we want sustainability in this plan. So there must be sufficient flexibility for the housing society.
Professor Lau, I think the property prices would hinge very much on the premium and the construction cost. If you're charging a market rate, now the Queen's Cube built by the URA, they are asking for $15,000 per square foot. And the members of the public would be priced out of the market. I'm sure that you have to consider, with regard to this particular scheme, the land premium, how the land premium is going to be worked out. Will you offer concessionary premium? If you charge a market premium, the public would be priced out of the market. Chief Executive, but this is certainly the concessionary premium. If you work back on the premium, it would be very cheap. The housing society will not be building Queen's Cube. This is for the well-off. There are people who like to be in the hustle and bustle of town. In Geneva, Old Town, I mean, you have all these very small-sized units that are very, very expensive. They're like the hustle and bustle. But what we are talking about is no frills, small and medium-sized flats. We're not charging the same price as Queen's Cube. In that case, we don't really have to build them. There are plenty in the market out there. Mr. Wang Litong, Mr. Chief Executive, 2012, we've endorsed the constitutional reform package. A lot of people find these really painful. We're not sure whether we will be able to take a small step forward. Some would say that this step is a backward step. Every time we discuss the constitutional reform, there are diverse opinions, and the internal attrition is getting worse. So there are people who suggested we should legislate all in one go, and we should achieve a consensus on the roadmap. When you ran for office, Mr. Chief Executive, you said that you would be resolving this universal suffrage issue once and for all within your tenure. My question for you, Mr. Chief Executive, is that you've got 2 years in office, not long, not short. Will you be coming up with a consensus on the roadmap for universal suffrage? If so, what are you going to do? If not, why not? Are you giving up on this unaccomplished undertaking that you gave when you ran for office? Chief Executive, my undertaking was very clear when I ran for office. After I was elected, I put in place the timetable for universal suffrage. I've already delivered my undertaking. There are details that cannot be completed within this administration. What else will the next administration be doing if all the details are there? There are still outstanding issues to be resolved. By the end of the month, we'll have to present the proposal regarding the 2012 package. There is a lot of controversy there. In the community out there regarding 2017-2020, there can be further discussion. I welcome this development, and there is a need for this. We have to explore what system would be best for Hong Kong. But as far as I am concerned, in my remaining time, how best should I spend my time? As you said, every time we talk about the issue, we are reopening old wounds. Since 2005, I've been through some painful
periods. I'm sure that the next administration will take over from here regarding this. We are working hard on the local legislation, and we are working hard on the 2017 preparatory work, and also regarding the 2020 universal suffrage and so on. This is something for the long term. I'm sure that there is a lot of wisdom out there in the community. The next administration can conclude this and take the matter forward. Mr. Tong, I think the chief executive is not being fair. He is giving a half answer. The chief executive already said that this is a long, protracted process. This may not be completed in 2 years' time. My question is, are you going to do some preparatory work within these 2 years in office to pave the way for the next administration to resolve the issue once and for all? Why can't you do this, Chief Executive? There is a lot that has yet to be done regarding 2012. We have to do the legislative work, and then we have to prepare for the district council election in the coming year, and then the legislative council election. We will take a step at a time that would be more appropriate. Regarding constitutional reform, I know what I should do. I've done what I ought to do. When we take the matter forward, we need further new thinking. Mr. Cheung Hok-ming. Thank you, President. Mr. Chief Executive, para 123. The Chief Executive talked about Saiwan, Hoi Ha, Pak Lap, and Solopun. The government has prepared draft development permission area plans, and there remains 50 sites not yet covered by the statutory plans. The Chief Executive would like to meet conservation and social development needs together. So regarding these 50 sites adjacent to the country parks, have you conducted any evaluation as to the ratio between private land and government land? If private land is involved, what incentives will the government be offering to incentivize people, the private owners, to support the government scheme? Chief Executive, there is a mixture of private land and government land. The private land, if it is agricultural land, they can be kept on like this. For government land, we will be proceeding according to our plan. Some we do it by the OZP. For others, we govern them under the Country Parks Ordinance. For the permitted development, this will continue. It would be difficult to change the land use, though. Mr. Cheung Hok-ming, Mr. Chief Executive, will you explain to us clearly regarding these 50 sites? I'm talking about the private land within these 50 sites. Will the land use be changed in any way? Chief Executive, I'm sure each piece of land will have its own characteristics. If they are used for agricultural use, they can continue to be used for this manner. I mean, this covers a whole lot of information, government land and private land, and I hope that you would, I would take the matter up with the Development Secretary and let you have the information. But we realize that the people of Hong Kong are very sensitive to the development of the country park. They like to retain the local characteristics in these areas. So we have to be very careful in proceeding with that. There is very much a consensus there. As to whether the development potential of the private land would be affected, I think we have to conduct some analysis there. What the law permits being done will be allowed to be done, but a lot of this land is actually agricultural land instead of land for development. Dr. Leung Kwok-hung. Thank you, President. Mr. Chief Executive, not standard working hours. I'm asking a question about the insurance healthcare insurance. Consultation is going on. There are lots of details that have to be worked out, like the manpower, the supervision, and how the $50 billion is going to be used, and so on. There is one thing the chief executive has to handle himself, and that is the land supply. At the moment, private hospitals, there are 3,700 beds. The utilization is well over 100% for some hospitals. If the insurance scheme is to be implemented in 2013, by our estimate, we may need to double the number of private hospital beds to the tune of 9,000. Chief executive, we might say that 4 plots of land have been earmarked for the development of medical institutions, but as far as I know, they can only provide no more than 2,000 beds altogether. And if you want to develop the medical industry, and it wouldn't be until 2015 that the hospitals will be built. And you have to count on these 4 plots of land, and you have to cater for the development of this sector and also the insurance, healthcare insurance scheme. Are you proceeding too slowly? Chief Executive, I think what we are doing is to expand the public sector and to make arrangements for the private sector. Wong Kwok-hung, Zhangguanou, Taipo, and Lantau. There are private hospitals to be built. I've got a list here. I'm sure you've seen this list yourself. I don't really to give it any more plug myself. In the public sector, as I said in the policy address in Tin Shui Wai, there is going to be a hospital. There will be expansion and renovation of other hospitals. There will be a hospital for children, and we're going to increase the number of beds. Dr. Leung, there is also this other issue of manpower. If the healthcare insurance is going to be successful, if the services are to be improved, we need to increase the number of beds. We have to increase the medical professionals, physiotherapists, doctors, nurses, and so on. We are doing this in a multi-directional manner. We have to increase the capacity for our training. We've got 4 plots of land available. If this is not sufficient, we can identify more land. There are some land which is considered to be unfavorable, but we try to squeeze more land for this purpose. I am confident that we have seen the response regarding the 4 plots of land, but I mean the problem doesn't lie with land, but also manpower. Dr. Leung? Yes, doctors and nurses, I'm sure that the health secretary will be able to resolve them. There are some problems that can be resolved by the secretary, but there are other issues that the secretary simply cannot resolve them. We have to count on the chief executive. I'm glad to hear that you will continue to identify land, but I hope that you would cast your sight further out and try to identify land with about 1 hectare in size, which is closer to urban areas, and I hope that you would put them in the application list. It would take anything up to 5 years to build hospitals. 2015, I mean, if you wait until 2015 to see whether the land is sufficient, then people who have taken out medical insurance might have to queue up for their care. I hope that you would release more land in the coming 1 or 2 years to meet the demand in the market. Yes, Chief Executive, we'll work hard on this. We will look at the response to the 4 plots of land to be made available. But as I said, we should encourage the development of private hospitals. We do need to have all different dimensions included. Mr. Jeffrey Lam. President, Mr. Chief Executive, you mentioned the CCF, the Community Care Fund, to alleviate the plight of the needy. In fact, the Economic Energy proposed similar idea. The government should take the lead to set up such a fund. I think we share. There is commonality running between you and us. As someone from the business sector, I support the CCF. The people of Hong Kong do not have an animosity against the rich, but the business sector does have the obligation to return what they get to the community. They should work together to build a nice community and to promote further economic development. This is not intended to assuage the anti-business sentiment. I'm sure that a lot of business people would be happy to take part in the CCF, but a lot of details have yet to be threshed out. Today, we've seen and we've heard that some large corporations, some enterprises expressed their support for this CCF. I'm sure a lot of the participants will be emerging and they will be expressing support. I'd like to see this fund being implemented. The details like the application details and so on should be finalized soon enough. Mr. Chief Executive, does the fund have any operational principles? Will there be any auditing of the income? Will there be any individual cases that will be handled?
Chief Executive, just now I tasked Mr. Henry Tang with this responsibility. I think it's not very fair to ask him for an answer so soon. We would like to help those people who are not covered by the CSSA or other schemes. They are part of our grassroots. We must have cases first before we know who can benefit from this community care fund. In fact, I noticed that for many elderly cases, student cases, grassroots cases that would need further assistance from us, well, I have been asked what we're going to do to help the 5 no's or 3 no's. So the first and foremost objective of this fund is to reach those who are not yet reached by existing funds and schemes. Secondly, we would like the money to reach directly the recipients, and we would like to minimize administrative costs as far as possible. We're talking about 5 to 10% of administrative costs. So these are the broad objectives. But then we still have to work out the details, and we have to report to the LegCo. If we're talking about $10 billion, we of course have to be accountable to the public. So first of all, Mr. Henry Tang and his colleagues will consult the stakeholders and participants. Secondly, we must have flexibility. If we are as rigid as existing schemes, there'll still be people left out. So we have to spend more effort on this, but the enthusiasm is there. There are already tycoons who have expressed their willingness to support such a fund. Let me repeat, I do not believe that Hong Kong people harbor animosity against the rich or the business sector, when in fact they only target injustice and unfair and unreasonable approaches or practices. So we must not generalize such a phenomenon to the extent that we say that Hong Kong people are anti-rich or anti-business. Well, in fact, both rich and poor have their respective responsibilities. We would like to have a harmonious society. Mr. Jeffrey Lam, now the Economic Energy would have further proposals for the government. I hope that we can promote self-help as well as helping others. Now, these are the concepts that we would like to promote. And I hope that this CCF will not duplicate in functions with other funds. But for the business sector, apart from contributing money, what else they can do? Yes, In fact, in the policy address and much earlier, I already mentioned that the business sector may not just contribute money. We need the talents from the business sector. Social enterprises usually have very low returns, and in the past, the business sector was not interested in social enterprises. Now we have hundreds of social enterprises. What they lack is not funds, but management experience and business experience. So I really want the business sector to help them in those regards. In particular, for the retirees, they need more help. I really want the business sector to mingle with the rest of the community, not just in terms of funding, but also in terms of talents and abilities. Many NGOs and non-profit-making bodies are interested in running social enterprises, but they lack business experience. So I think in that regard, there can be more cooperation between the business sector and other sectors of the community. Ms. Emily Lau, well, the theme of the policy address is sharing prosperity for a caring society. I'd like to know from the CE whether he knows that public opinion is that our people want universal suffrage as soon as possible. Universal suffrage for CE election and LegCo election, and to abolish small circle elections. And then on constitutional reform, it said in the policy address that all sectors of the community should assist in the implementation of universal suffrage for the 2017 CE election and 2020 LegCo election. Well, some objectives will go beyond the term of office of the CE, like environmental protection, standard working hours, property purchase, etc. So why doesn't the CE tell the public that by 2017 and 2020 respectively, there will no longer be any small circle election? Now, this issue has been disturbing Hong Kong people for many years. Why don't you tackle this problem before you go, so that the business sector and whoever will know that they can no longer rely on free political lunches. They have to fight for their own political interest. Chief Executive, well, 2017 and 2020 will exceed my tenure of office. I think I have to assess where my abilities can reach. So I should concentrate on the 2012 constitutional arrangement. Members of the public will continue to discuss the arrangements for 2017 and 2020. And it's about time for us to start discussion on those two elections, because such discussions will take time. But then during my term, time is not ripe for us to work out the details for 2017 and 2020. We can only work on 2012. Mr. President, I can't understand why we're not prepared for 2017 and 2020. Why is it that in paragraph 153, you say that we should pave the way to universal suffrage? So if we're not yet ready, why you say this in your policy address? Well, if we can do the work for 2012 well, we'll be paving the way for 2017 and 2020. So we should perform well for 2012 first. As I just said, very often we mention a lot of things that seem to be causing Hong Kong agony. Well, I think we should understand what we should do at what time. In the residual time of my term, I think we should tackle livelihood issues first. Mr. Wong Ting Kwong, Mr. CE, yesterday in your policy address, you mentioned inter alia that an additional $10 billion will be offered for the two schemes, loan schemes for SMEs. At the beginning of this year, in order to stabilize Hong Kong, $100 billion worth scheme was implemented, and 93,000 applications were approved, costing us $97 billion. That indicates how important assistance to enterprises is. As you said, the external factors are still variables. The European debt issues, etc., are still with us, and we have to get ourselves well prepared. Some enterprises have not recovered yet. If you rely solely on this $100 billion worth special guarantee scheme, and bear in mind, please, that some debts have not yet been paid off, and once the maturity date comes, you have to chase after the enterprises for the unpaid debts and will reach another crisis. So will you contemplate any soft landing measures, for example, by reducing the guarantee ratio, etc.? Mr. Wong, every time when something special happens to our economy, we've been adopting special measures. We've been doing that since 1998. And we overcame our difficulties one by one. As for the special guarantee loan scheme, we designed that specially for SMEs, particularly those with establishments in Guangdong province. Our banks now understand that our enterprises do have a sound foundation. They won't easily close. So it's not so likely that the difficulties you mentioned will happen in Hong Kong. If necessary, we can inject further funds into the scheme. But then, if we do that, further risks may emerge. If we continue with special measures during ordinary times, the effectiveness of the scheme will diminish and risks will rise. You asked about soft landing measures. That's why the Hong Kong Mortgage Corporation Limited has been doing something to allow SMEs, including those having establishments on the mainland, to be able to meet their special needs. You need not worry. If the world is so unfortunate as to have another financial tsunami, we'll respond immediately. But then after the turmoil is over, if we continue with such schemes, there will be moral risks and moral hazards. But then I agree with you that we should also consider soft landing measures, and our schemes have already taken care of that. For the SME Export Marketing Fund and SME Development Fund, they are for long-term purposes. Therefore, they may not be able to meet immediate needs. And some loans have not yet been paid off. So the original objectives of these schemes may not be met. So I really want you to try to do something to minimize the shock of retreating from the market. You know, it's easier to invade than to retreat. Well, the industry is very grateful for the administration's immediate assistance. But then, if at the end of the day, when the government retreats, the enterprises may encounter difficulties. So please consider soft landing measures.
Chief Executive, I agree with what you said. When we exit the market, we've got to tread very carefully. In 1998, we dealt with exit in a special way,
and the tracker fund was designed at the time. This special loan guarantee scheme, I'm sure that the mortgage cooperation scheme would be able to make up for that. Mr. Casey Chen will take the matter up with you further, and this is a guarantee for soft lending. Last question, Mr. KK Fong. Thank you, President. Mr. Chief Executive, you still believe in big market, small government, but in the property market, it is really a bad market. By that I mean that when a capital is large enough, then there would be competition in the market. In the past 2 years, you can see that if one is not well capitalized, one cannot really bid for any land. Yesterday or day before yesterday, we saw really the auction would fetch a really huge price. In the policy address, it refers to the 3 principles regarding property market. The chief executive is really counting on the market. In other words, the government is leaving everything to the bad market. The government is leaving everything to the well-capitalized big players. And the housing problems on the part of the people cannot be addressed. It's okay if you do not accept the reality, but the chief executive and his administration repeatedly said something that really deceived the members of the public. Now, the first incident is the consultation. You can conduct a consultation to ask people about their opinions about the subsidized ownership. If you decided against HOS in the beginning, you could have said that other than HOS, you could offer your opinion. Or if you didn't have any conclusion, you should have opted for the option that commanded the majority views. But it wasn't to be. You asked people for their opinion. By the end of the consultation, the Secretary told us categorically that there would be no HOS resumption. Was it a fake or sham consultation? Second, in the policy address, the Chief Executive said that it was a no-no to convert a PRH land into HOS flats. I'm sure that the Chief Executive here and at the CSD, myself and Li Wing-tat told the government to build HOS on fresh land instead of PRH land. Well, I have to explain these 3 incidents. And you are putting PRH on a collision course with HOS, and the PRH applicants would be dead against using PRH land for other purposes. Third, when we raised this issue here, or CSD, the chief executive said that there is simply no land. There is no reclamation allowed. We said that Mr. Tong Chi-wah set up a cross-departmental committee to identify land. But today, in the policy address, you are going to set up a committee under the FS to identify land for 5,000 units to be built. I feel cheated all the way along. The members of the public feel cheated all the way along. Why did you demonize HOS? Your question, please. My question is, why did you adopt this dishonorable way to discontinue or to not revive the HOS scheme? Chief Executive, I don't agree with the allegation of deception. I think the key thing is to find the best way forward. If our scheme is going to be more favorable than the traditional HOS, why don't we pursue this idea? As I said, this is an optimized version of HOS. Why do we have to stick to the conventional way of doing it? It's all about flexibility. It's all about down payment. It's all about the needs on the part of the public. No scheme would be absolutely perfect, but all the way along, we exited the HOS market on really for good reason. And we have to think of new ways to overcome the problems. Mr. Fong, you talked about a big market and small government. It is a macroeconomic philosophy, but in the property market, we have intervened the market for 50 years. Since the construction of HOS flats, since Shek Mei, we started building PRH units, so we continue with the PRH unit construction. Well over about half of the population is actually live in subsidized housing. We continue to do it. We try every means to do this, and this my home purchase plan is intended to help people to achieve home ownership. I don't think you should resort to using the wording like deception. What deception is that? We are trying to use the best way possible. If there are good things about HOS, bring them up and discuss it. We can make a comparison between the My Home Purchase scheme and the HOS, and you ask the prospective buyers. I mean, it's no good for you to say that you are dead against any scheme that we come up with. You like to just like the resumption of the HOS, and we are having the grassroots people uppermost in our mind. It is difficult to identify plots of land. I have squeezed these pieces of land for this purpose. It wasn't really easy. I think we have to have a steering committee to identify the land. I wouldn't get any land from the application list. I wouldn't try to reduce the supply of land for the private sector. If the land supply of the private sector is reduced, the property prices will shoot up. I don't really want to get any land from the PRH stock. It is really a difficult undertaking, but we'll continue to do it. I think we have to we have to refrain from looking at the issue with the conspiracy theory. If you try to look at it with a conspiracy theory, everybody is devious. Everybody is working with malicious intention. Mr. K.K. Fong, if you've taken part in the CSD, Ms. Rosanna Wong highlighted 5 merits with regard to HOS. Not me, Rosanna Wong. I want to repeat it. For 50 years, you 30% are living in PRH and 20% are living in HOS, and this is a wonderful policy, and you are giving up on your wonderful policy. My question for the Chief Executive is this. I'm not asking you to make a choice between the two. Why can't you have both? On the one hand, you have this My Home Purchase scheme. I think that this is a hopeless scheme. Why can't you have 1,000 My Home Purchase scheme flats and 2,000 HOS flats in tandem? Chief Executive. This is a choice. I feel that any scheme that we formulate, there are considerable questions and queries. We will patiently explain the merits of this scheme to the people of Hong Kong. Ms. Rosanna Wong talked about 5 merits. So with HOS, I can highlight 9, 12 merits with regard to this My Home Purchase scheme. I don't really want to belabor the point and waste your time. I think we have to be calm and collected. We should not resort to verbal violence. We should not be insulting other people in our discussion. Did I use verbal violence? I'm not talking about you. All right, that's it for the question and answer session. The Chief Executive will leave the chamber. Please remain standing. Thank you all very much. I now adjourn the Council until 11 a.m. on Wednesday, 20th of October, 2010.